It's Friday in Tryon, North Carolina, and if I were to say to you, who is Epaphroditus, what would you say? Who is Epaphroditus? Well, he was a person that was sent from Philippi to Paul, who was in prison, and then Paul sent him back to Philippi, very likely to carry the letter to the Philippians. Now, how do we know that? Well, we know that because we're in chapter 2, verses 19 through 30. And I think it's important to note that you don't have to be famous to have been of great value to God. You don't have to be a famous name like Charles Stanley or Adrian Rogers. You don't have to be a Billy Graham or a Franklin Graham. You can be an unknown and still be of great value to God. And that's why I particularly like to call out Epaphroditus, to show you the great value that a person can have. He only appears twice. And he appears twice in the letter to the Philippians, and he appears twice in order for us to hear about him. But it's in chapter 2, verse 25, and chapter 4, verse 18. No other book, no other mention. And yet he was of great value to God. That should be reassuring to you. And this being Ministers Appreciation Month, I hope that you'll realize that while your pastor may not be famous, the ministers that minister to you may not be known outside of your community or outside of your state. That doesn't mean that not of great value to God. There are several people whose names I could call out right now who served with me at Southside Baptist Church, who probably most of you never heard of, unless you happen to be at Southside Baptist Church when they were there. But they were of great value to me, and they were of great value to God, and they continue to be of great value to God, serving where they are. And again, they may not be known outside of their community or even outside of their state. That doesn't mean they're not of great value to God. So let's take a look at this chapter 2, verses 19. Paul is sending Timothy back to Philippi, but not immediately. He's going to send him at some point, and he has a confidence that he himself may come to see them again. But he has a genuine care for their welfare, and so does Timothy. And so we see this desire for him to go back to Philippi, where he started a church, and to see all of those believers that are there. And he reminds them how Timothy has proved his worth. Now, Timothy we know about. Timothy we see quite often in the New Testament, but Timothy is still recommended by Paul that people would appreciate him. One is that has a genuine interest and care about what's going on back at Philippi. I want you to know, if your pastor has served in more than one city and more than one church, he has a love and a care for some of the churches that he's shared with and ministered to, just as I do with the church that I served in West Palm Beach, and the church that I served at Dover, and the church that I served at Southside in Brandon. I have a love and a care for those people. I've recently corresponded with a number of the people from Northwood Baptist Church. I've communicated recently with a number of people from Dover Baptist Church. And almost daily, either looking at their postings or praying for them. The people at Southside Baptist Church, after all, I served there for 27 years. And you come to love the people deeply in that many years. I hope that that gives you a picture of what Paul is doing here. He's writing back to a church that he has a great love for, and he's telling them what a great love Timothy has for them, and how he's proven his worth by sacrificing and by serving, just as a child would serve his father, he says in verse 22. And so then he goes on and says, therefore, remember, was important you understand his boasting about Timothy and his service. That he says, as soon as I know and I trust this Lord is going to allow me to send, but I'm sending right now, if Epaphroditus, and he says, I'm sending him to you because he's become to me a brother, a fellow worker, a fellow soldier, and that he's a minister as well as a missionary. And he says, I know that he's longing to see you because you've heard that he was sick. And he's concerned, not because he was sick, he's concerned because he's afraid you're worrying about him. Isn't that just like a selfless minister? Not concerned about his own sickness, but concerned because his flock is worried about him. So he says, I'm sending him back, and I know that that he longs to see you and that you long to see him. I want you to know his sickness was nearly to death. Nearly to death. And so he makes it very, very clear by verse 28. He says, therefore, I'm sending him to you for not only you and for him, but for me also. He says, I'm sending him for him because I know he longs to see you, to relieve your worries about his sickness. I'm sending him because of you, because I know he can be of ministry to you, and I can convey this message to you. And I'm concerned and decided to send him because it will benefit me, because I will get to hear how things are going there. So Paul makes it very clear what a critical ministry this will be, of him sending him back. And he says, I want you to receive him in the Lord with joy. Now, he wasn't concerned that the people wouldn't be glad to see him. Epaphroditus was well loved, I'm sure, by the people at Philippi, but he wanted them to have joy. I mean, Paul's in prison, but he still wanted them to have joy. And he wanted them to be able to hear everything that he had shared with Epaphroditus. And he wanted him to be able to convey to them all of the joys and the privileges that they had serving together. This is a particularly interesting section of Scripture from verse 19 through 30, because it shows you the bond that is established between pastors and staff. Because this is the kind of bond that Paul had with Timothy and with Epaphroditus. The kind of bond that comes over working together for the cause of Christ. Just recently, the pastor of the church that we attend here in North Carolina was advised that his youth minister was going to, after graduation, go to a much larger church in a intern position. It was with joy and regret for both of them, for they truly loved each other. And yet, when God calls, you have to answer that call. And when God calls, you have to be willing to let go. And that's not always easy in the ministry. That's not always easy to do with staff. So as we celebrate this month of minister appreciation, I hope you realize that pastors and staff have a bond with each other. They see each other and they see the work that's being done for the cause of Christ, the sacrifices that are made. And as you read through Philippians 2:19 through 30, you'll see the kind of deep feelings that ministers can acquire for each other. But don't believe that that's restricted to just the minister to minister. Please read into this passage of Scripture how deeply the ministers love the flock, those that have been put into their care. And I hope that you'll write that note of appreciation to the pastors that are serving you now and to the ministers on their staff, And I hope that you'll remember to pray for them regularly. That's your thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.